Until the deal was final, the Johnson team wanted to keep the negotiations secret from South Vietnam. But Nixon had opened a secret channel of communication with South Vietnamese President Thieu. The go-between was Anna Chenot.
He was getting information from both sides. He probably was giving information to both sides, too.
On October the 31st, Henry Kissinger called the Nixon campaign to say that there had been a breakthrough in the talks. "I've got some important information," said Kissinger. "They're breaking out the champagne in Paris." 12 hours later, the announcement was made. The bombing of North Vietnam would cease and final negotiations would begin. The prospect of peace gave Humphrey a last-minute surge in the polls.
And then finally, just a few days before the election, we were moving to substantive negotiations for the first time. And there were great hopes at that time.
But just 3 days before the election, President Thieu defied Johnson and refused to join the peace negotiations.
Certainly one reason is the advice they got from Nixon's people. It's clear that they were being told to hold out and not go to Paris.
FBI surveillance of the Nixon team's contacts with Thieu confirmed this. "Hold on," he was told. "We're gonna win." Without the participation of South Vietnam, the peace talks collapsed. Richard Nixon won the popular vote by a margin of less than 1%.
And we know further that Mr. Kissinger's opinion of Mr. Nixon was very low. Why is he suddenly doing this tremendous favor during an election campaign to someone for whom he has nothing but contempt?
Why?
It's in the hope of a political reward.
Dr. Henry Kissinger has agreed to come with the White House staff as the assistant to the president-elect for national security affairs.
I was sitting in the lobby waiting to get to see the president-elect, and there was this Rockefeller man, as he was described to me, going in to see him. And what happened was that Nixon stole the crown jewel out of his longtime adversary's crown, and that was Henry Kissinger, the most brilliant man on the Rockefeller staff.
Dr. Kissinger is perhaps one of the major scholars in America and the world today in this area. He has never yet had a full-time government assignment, and he will bring to this responsibility a fresh approach.
I did not know Richard Nixon when he appointed me as his security advisor. In fact, I had spent 3 presidential campaigns backing Governor Nelson Rockefeller against Richard Nixon. So when you read about how carefully I plotted my way into Nixon's proximity, and want to teach that to your children, say, support the opponent of the man for whom you want to work.
Do I think he saw what he did as betrayal of the peace process or the move by Johnson to stop the bombing halt? I really think this guy doesn't see it that way. He saw it as a means to an end, which is why he's such a good apparatchik. His end was getting that job.
I, Richard Billhouse Nixon, do solemnly swear.
Upon taking office, Nixon and Kissinger moved to structure the administration in a way that would give the new National Security Advisor unprecedented power.
Dr. Kissinger is setting up at the present time a very exciting new procedure to revitalize the National Security Council.
It centralized control. It gave Nixon, and Kissinger on foreign policy a tremendous amount of sort of day-to-day control. They can control the paper movement, but they can control a lot of the policy options.
It's true also that Henry Kissinger chaired most of the committees and subcommittees, and that gave him unusual authority.
In order to achieve peace with honor, Nixon and Kissinger wanted to show Hanoi that the new president would use extreme force to prosecute the war, that he was capable of anything. It was an idea called the madman theory. Less than a month into Nixon's presidency, he and Kissinger began planning an attack against North Vietnamese sanctuaries in neighboring Cambodia.
The Americans started bombing Cambodia in 1969, soon after Nixon came into office, because they had a problem. The problem was that whole areas of eastern Cambodia, which was in theory a neutral country, not on the side of the North Vietnamese or the South Vietnamese, whole areas of the country had been taken over by the North Vietnamese communists.
The great miss of the Vietnam War was that the key to success was getting rid of the Vietnamese communist bases on the Cambodian side of the border.
Cambodia's enigmatic Prince Sihanouk had managed to keep his country out of the Vietnam War. He hoped to avoid taking sides and so prevent an open violation of Cambodia's neutrality.
And this led to all sorts of problems, because taking the war secretly into a neutral country meant you had to destroy the actual records or to conceal them very effectively, to lie, in fact.
Well, it was the motivation was for the secrecy because it was illegal. So, I mean, that's simple.
Under the U.S. Constitution, bombing Cambodia was an act of war that would require the approval of the U.S. Congress.
I don't know that Congress would have allowed it. The last thing Congress wanted then was an expansion of a war.
In February 1969, in a secret meeting on Air Force One, Kissinger and his aide, Alexander Haig, met with Air Force Colonel Ray Sitton to plan for the secret bombing of Cambodia.
What Kissinger wanted done was they asked Sitton to find a way to mask the bombing so nobody would know what's going on, and Sitton did. He found a way.
The initial secret bombing of Cambodia in 1969 was called Operation Menu, and each of the targets were different, or supposed to be different, North Vietnamese bases in Cambodia, and they were called after names of meals: breakfast, lunch, dinner, snack.
Starting with breakfast, Kissinger approved a plan to conceal the Cambodian bombing missions from military records. Under this dual reporting system, B-52 pilots would be pre-assigned targets in South Vietnam. In mid-flight, their planes would be rerouted by ground radar stations and guided to secret targets in Cambodia. The returning pilots would report that their bombs had been dropped on South Vietnam. Cambodia would never appear in the record. Under Kissinger's supervision, the U.S. flew 3,600 secret missions over Cambodia in 14 months, dropping 110,000 tons of bombs. Colonel Sitton recalled that Henry Kissinger was intimately involved in the direction and timing of the bombing raids.
Real attention to the cruelties of the details, picking targets, selecting hamlets and villages to be bombed.
It is an absurdity to say that a country can occupy a part of another country, kill your people, and that then you are violating its neutrality when you respond against the foreign troops that are on that neutral territory. It is total hypocrisy.
1 week after the first bombs had fallen in Cambodia, rumors of the operation began to surface in the press. Kissinger contacted the FBI to request that wiretaps be used to find the source of the leaks.
He wiretapped American journalists with whom he had supposedly friendly and close relations.
It legitimized me. There I was, a reporter, writer, commentator for the New York Times, and everybody felt a little creepy about, here's this Nixon apologist writing for the Times. But then when it turned out that I was wiretapped, all of a sudden I was in a new fraternity.
He wiretapped aides and associates in the Pentagon.
I was one of the people who was wiretapped while serving under him. I cannot forgive him for being a party to it or for never apologizing.
It was not one of the things that filled me with wild joy. On the other hand, it also seemed a way by which it could be demonstrated that my staff was loyal, but I'm sure there were a complex of reasons that went into it.
To some, the wiretapping was just a part of a campaign by Kissinger to fortify his position as Nixon's deputy.
He was endlessly playing off his own staff, one against the other, and playing them off against the president.
And there was a lot of jockeying, particularly on Henry's part, for position.
And Kissinger was determined to accrete as much power as possible to him,
We used to joke that the real hostile foreign powers were not Moscow or Beijing or any of our rivals in the world. The real hostile powers were the rest of the American government, the Department of State, the White House staff, the CIA, the Defense Department. Those were Henry's principal adversaries because they were the rivals for power in Washington.